Imagine a world where power didn't just come from armies, but from silence, from shadows, from a single blade placed at exactly the right moment. In the 13th century, at the height of the Mongol Empire, when cities burned and entire nations fell in the path of unstoppable conquest, there existed only one kind of threat that could truly unsettle the most powerful ruler on earth. Not an army, not a rebellion, but an unseen hand. Inside the heavily guarded palace of the Great Khan, every corridor was watched, every entrance fortified. This wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Because somewhere, far beyond the deserts and mountains, a message had already been sent. 40 men had been chosen. 40 assassins, trained not just to kill, but to die without hesitation. Their mission was simple, almost impossible. Infiltrate the heart of the Mongol Empire and eliminate its leader. No banners, no war drums, just patience, precision, and absolute loyalty to a cause that thrived in secrecy. These were not ordinary enemies. They didn't conquer land, they conquered fear. And that raises a question that history itself struggles to answer. When the most powerful empire the world had ever seen came face to face with an enemy that could not be fought in open battle, who truly held the advantage? This is the story of what happened when the Mongols encountered the world's deadliest assassin order, and how that encounter would change both sides forever. To understand why the Mongols, an empire that crushed kingdoms without hesitation, would come to fear a hidden order, you have to go back more than a century before their rise, to a place that seemed almost designed to defy the world below it. High in the rugged Alborz mountains of Persia stood a fortress known as Alamut, the Eagle's Nest. It wasn't just difficult to reach, it was nearly impossible to conquer. A single narrow path wound its way up steep cliffs, where even a handful of defenders could hold off an entire army. From a distance, it looked less like a stronghold and more like a myth carved into stone. This was where Hassan I Sabah built something far more dangerous than a kingdom. Hassan wasn't a warlord in the traditional sense. He didn't command massive armies or seek glory on the battlefield. Instead, he was a strategist, a scholar, and above all, a visionary who understood something most rulers didn't. True power doesn't always come from overwhelming force. Sometimes, it comes from precision, from fear, from making your enemy believe they are never truly safe. From his isolated base in Alamut, Hassan created a network that would stretch across Persia and Syria, an organization later known to the world as the Assassin Order. But unlike empires that expanded through conquest, this order grew through influence, secrecy, and absolute loyalty. At the heart of it were the Fedayeen, elite operatives trained not just in combat, but in discipline, patience, and unwavering belief in their mission. Their philosophy was simple, yet terrifyingly effective. One man, one target. No large-scale battles. No drawn-out wars. Just a single individual, placed in the right position at the right time, with a blade, or sometimes poison, aimed at a figure whose death could shift the balance of power overnight. These assassins didn't expect to escape. In fact, many embraced death as part of the mission. That level of commitment made them unpredictable and therefore nearly impossible to stop. And they didn't strike randomly. Their targets were chosen with surgical precision: kings, generals, political masterminds. The kinds of people whose survival entire nations depended on. In 1092, one of the most powerful men in the Seljuk Empire, Nizam al-Mulk, was assassinated by a man disguised as a holy figure, someone trusted, someone invisible. The message was clear: no position was high enough, no security tight enough to guarantee safety. Decades later, the pattern continued. Conrad of Montferrat, a key crusader leader and king in all but name, was killed by two men who had spent months earning his trust before striking. Even Saladin, one of the most respected military leaders in the Islamic world, reportedly lived under constant threat. At one point, a warning was left near him as he slept, a chilling reminder that the assassins could reach him anytime they chose. Over time, their reputation became their greatest weapon. Rulers began to fear not just death, but the idea that it could come from anyone. A servant, a messenger, even a friend. The Assassin Order didn't need to dominate battlefields because they had already conquered something far more powerful, the human mind. By the 13th century, their network of fortified strongholds and loyal operatives had turned them into a force that couldn't be ignored. They weren't an empire in the traditional sense, but they didn't need to be. They operated in the spaces between power, exploiting weaknesses, shaping outcomes from the shadows. And for generations, no army, no matter how large or advanced, had found a reliable way to stop them. By the early 13th century, a new force was rewriting the rules of power, and it wasn't operating from the shadows. It came from the open pay, fast, relentless, and impossible to contain. The Mongol Empire, forged under Genghis Khan, expanded with a speed the world had never seen. Cities that had stood for centuries fell in weeks. Armies that once defined entire civilizations were swept aside like obstacles in a storm. This wasn't just conquest, it was domination on a scale that forced every kingdom, every ruler, to reconsider what survival even meant. And yet, in the midst of this unstoppable expansion, there existed a quiet exception. The Assassin Order, entrenched in their mountain fortresses across Persia and Syria, did not immediately clash with the Mongols. In fact, for a time, the two forces coexisted in an uneasy balance. The Mongols had bigger targets: China, the Islamic Caliphates, Eastern Europe. Compared to those massive campaigns, the isolated strongholds of the Assassins didn't seem worth the cost. And from the Assassins' perspective, provoking the most powerful war machine on Earth would have been reckless. So, for a brief moment in history, silence held. But silence in a world like this rarely lasts. In 1251, Monk Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, ascended to power as the great Khan of the Mongol Empire. His coronation was more than a ceremony, it was a global event. Representatives, envoys, and leaders from across continents gathered to witness the rise of a new ruler at the center of the world's most dominant empire. It was a moment designed to project strength, unity, and absolute control. And that's exactly why it became the perfect target. Hidden among the delegations was a group that didn't come to celebrate. They came to end an empire before it could grow even stronger. Disguised as diplomats, operatives linked to the Assassin Order had infiltrated the heart of Mongol power. They carried no banners, no visible weapons, nothing that would raise suspicion, until it was almost too late. Their true objective was simple and devastating: assassinate Monk Khan during one of the most public and symbolic moments of his reign. If they had succeeded, the consequences would have been immediate and catastrophic. The Mongol Empire, vast and newly stabilized under fresh leadership, could have fractured from within. Power struggles, uncertainty, and internal conflict might have followed, exactly the kind of chaos the Assassins had mastered for generations. But history turned on a narrow edge. Whether through suspicion, intelligence, or pure chance, the plot was uncovered before it could be executed. The infiltrators were captured, and the immediate threat was neutralized. On the surface, it looked like a victory for the Mongols. A crisis avoided, a ruler saved. But beneath that surface, something far more significant had shifted. For Monk Khan, this wasn't just an attempted assassination. It was a revelation. The Assassins were no longer a distant, isolated group operating in the mountains. They had demonstrated the ability to penetrate the most secure environment in the empire, to strike at its very core. This wasn't a nuisance. It was an existential threat. Because unlike traditional enemies, you couldn't defeat them in a single battle. You couldn't outmaneuver them on an open field. They didn't need numbers. They didn't need territory. All they needed was access and patience. In that moment, the balance between the two forces collapsed. What had once been cautious distance turned into calculated hostility. The Mongols, who had built their dominance through overwhelming force, now faced an enemy that required a completely different kind of response. And Monk Khan made a decision that would reshape the fate of the Assassin Order forever. This would no longer be a conflict avoided. It would be a war of elimination. Once Monk Khan made his decision, the conflict shifted from a shadow war into something far more deliberate and far more devastating. This was no longer about preventing another assassination attempt. It was about removing the threat entirely. And for that, he turned to one of the most capable commanders in the Mongol world, his brother, Hulagu Khan. Hulagu wasn't sent to negotiate. He wasn't sent to intimidate. His mission was absolute: find the assassin order, dismantle it, and leave nothing behind that could rise again. But unlike the vast open plains where Mongol cavalry dominated with speed and precision, this war would be different. The enemy wasn't concentrated in cities or marching in formation. They were embedded in mountains, protected by fortresses that had been designed for survival over centuries. Hulagu understood immediately that brute force alone wouldn't be enough. So instead of rushing into battle, he did something the Mongols rarely needed to do: he prepared. For nearly 3 years, he assembled one of the most formidable military forces of the era. This wasn't just a Mongol army. It was a coalition, drawing strength from across the empire and beyond. Estimates suggest it reached well over 100,000, possibly closer to 150,000 troops. Mongol cavalry formed the core, fast, disciplined, and ruthless, but they were only one part of the equation. What made this campaign different was its engineering power. Hulagu brought in Chinese siege specialists, experts who had mastered the art of breaking walls that were once thought unbreakable. They carried advanced siege equipment, massive trebuchets, counterweight machines, and other technologies capable of tearing down even the most fortified positions. This wasn't just an invasion. It was a calculated operation designed to solve a very specific problem. How do you destroy an enemy that hides behind stone, elevation, and time? By 1253, the army began its march westward. The movement itself was a statement of intent. Columns of troops crossed deserts, rivers, and vast stretches of Central Asia, moving with the same relentless discipline that had defined Mongol expansion for decades. But this time, there was a noticeable difference in pace. This wasn't a lightning strike, it was a slow, tightening grip. The first phase of the campaign targeted the outer defenses of the assassin network. Smaller fortresses, positioned along the borders of their territory, were the initial objectives. These strongholds had long served as buffers, early warning systems designed to delay and weaken any invading force. But against Hulagu's army, they became the first casualties. One by one they fell. Some resisted and were crushed. Others, recognizing the scale of what they were facing, surrendered. Either way, the result was the same. The perimeter was collapsing. Each victory sent a message deeper into the mountains. The Mongols weren't just coming, they were adapting. They were learning how to fight a war that wasn't built for them. Instead of avoiding fortified positions, they dismantled them methodically. Instead of being drawn into narrow terrain where cavalry lost its advantage, they relied on siege tactics and overwhelming coordination. Every fortress that fell reduced the assassin's ability to maneuver, to communicate, to survive. And as the outer defenses disappeared, the path toward the heart of the order became clearer. Alamut still stood, high above the landscape, untouched and seemingly unreachable. But for the first time in its history, it was no longer isolated by distance or fear. Hulagu's campaign was closing in, step by step, fortress by fortress, removing every layer of protection that had once made the assassin order untouchable. The war had begun, but more importantly, it had been redefined. This wasn't going to be a quick victory. It was going to be a systematic dismantling of an idea, a network, and a legacy that had survived for nearly 2 centuries. And for the first time, the assassins were facing an enemy willing to match their patience with something even more dangerous: inevitability. As Hulagu's campaign pushed deeper into the mountains, the war reached a point where momentum became irreversible. What had once been an unbreakable network of fortresses began to fracture under sustained pressure. One stronghold after another fell, not in dramatic last-stand battles, but through a steady collapse of resistance. The assassin order had spent generations building defenses designed to outlast enemies. But this time, the enemy wasn't leaving. Each fallen fortress carried more than tactical loss. It eroded the illusion of invincibility that had protected the order for nearly 2 centuries. Communication lines weakened. Supply chains broke down. And perhaps most critically, confidence began to crack from within. The assassins had always relied on discipline and belief as much as stone walls. Now, both were being tested in ways they had never experienced before. At the center of this unraveling stood a young leader, Rukn al-Din Kursha, who inherited command at the worst possible moment. Unlike his predecessors, he faced not scattered threats or political rivals, but a single, overwhelming force with a clear objective: total annihilation. Kursha understood what many before him had not been forced to consider, that survival might no longer be possible through resistance alone. So he turned to diplomacy. Envoys were sent. Messages were delivered. Offers of submission were carefully crafted in the hope of buying time, or perhaps securing some form of survival for what remained of the order. But Hulagu Khan had already made his intentions clear long before the first fortress fell. This was not a campaign of negotiation. It was a campaign of conclusion. As Mongol forces advanced, internal fractures deepened. Some strongholds, cut off and facing certain destruction, began to surrender rather than face annihilation. Others held out, but without coordination, their resistance became isolated and ultimately futile. In a system that had once thrived on unity and secrecy, even small breaks in cohesion proved devastating. Then came the moment that would have been unthinkable in any earlier generation. Kursha himself chose to surrender. It wasn't a dramatic battlefield defeat. There was no final clash at the gates of Alamut. Instead, it was a quiet, calculated decision made in the face of overwhelming reality. He stepped out from behind the walls that had symbolized the order's power and placed himself in Hulagu's hands. In doing so, he effectively signaled the end of organized resistance. What followed was as swift as it was symbolic. Under Mongol control, Kursha was ordered to send messages to remaining fortresses, instructing them to stand down. And astonishingly, many did. Strongholds that had resisted for generations opened their gates, not because they had been conquered in battle, but because the structure holding them together had collapsed. And then, at last, Hulagu turned his attention to Alamut. The fortress that had once seemed untouchable, perched high above the world, protected by terrain, design, and reputation, was entered without the kind of resistance history might have expected. What Hulagu found inside wasn't just a military stronghold, but the intellectual heart of the assassin order. Libraries filled with manuscripts on philosophy, science, mathematics, and theology, knowledge accumulated over generations. For a brief moment, there was a possibility that this legacy might be preserved. But the orders from above were absolute. The libraries were burned. Texts that could never be replaced were reduced to ash. The fortress itself was dismantled, its walls broken apart and cast down the mountainside. It wasn't just a victory, it was an erasure. And the final act was yet to come. Kursha, hoping to appeal directly to Monk Khan, requested permission to travel east. Hulagu allowed it, but the journey never brought redemption. Before reaching any meaningful audience, Kursha and his family were intercepted and executed. With that, the leadership of the assassin order was extinguished. What followed across Persia was not a clean end, but a purge. Mongol forces moved systematically through remaining territories, eliminating those still loyal to the order. Entire communities were wiped out. The scale was immense, the message unmistakable. Nothing would be left behind that could rebuild what had been destroyed. In the span of a few years, an organization that had shaped the politics of the Middle East for nearly 2 centuries was gone. Not defeated in a single battle, but dismantled piece by piece, its leaders executed, its fortresses destroyed, its legacy burned into memory rather than preserved in stone. The assassins had once mastered the art of ending lives with precision. In the end, they faced an empire that mastered something even more final, ending entire systems. In the end, the Mongols achieved what no empire before them had managed to do. They erased the assassin order from the political map. The fortresses were gone, their leaders executed, their networks dismantled. What had once been a silent force shaping the fate of kings and empires disappeared into history, not with a single decisive battle, but through a relentless campaign of pressure, patience, and total domination. And yet, victory came at a cost. The Mongols, masters of speed and open warfare, were forced to slow down, adapt, and commit enormous resources to eliminate an enemy that never fought on their terms. Years of preparation, massive armies, advanced siege technology, and prolonged campaigns across unforgiving terrain, this was not the kind of war they were built for. It was proof that even the most powerful empire in the world could be challenged, not by strength alone, but by strategy, belief, and an idea that refused to die easily. Because while the assassin order was destroyed physically, its legacy didn't vanish. It lives on in language itself. The word assassin, spoken across cultures and centuries, is a direct echo of who they were. But more than that, their story remains a powerful reminder that influence doesn't always come from numbers, and that fear, when used strategically, can rival even the greatest armies. This clash wasn't just about conquest. It was about two fundamentally different ways of understanding power. One built on overwhelming force, the other on precision and psychological impact. And while one ultimately defeated the other, the lesson is far more nuanced than victory or defeat. Because true power isn't just about how much you can destroy, it's about how deeply you can endure, adapt, and be remembered. If you found this story insightful, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history's most fascinating conflicts, where strategy, power, and human ambition collide in ways that still shape our world today.